So bear with me. So welcome everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining us for our first session in our Early Childhood Education and Care Conversation series. That is a mouthful. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all joining from today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining today. We acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and community. My name is Bree and I'm joining today from the lands of the Murrumarang people of Onyuan Nation. I do encourage you to share which lands you are joining from in the chat. I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we get into today's session. It is expected to run for approximately 30 minutes. Please note that this session is being recorded and all registered participants will receive a link to the recording. To ensure a smooth experience for everyone, if you require any technical support, if you could please use the chat function. If you do have any questions about the content, please use the Q&A box. In saying that, we will try to answer these questions if time permits. Otherwise, we will endeavour to answer those questions and provide those answers with the video recording afterwards. As I mentioned, this session is being recorded for future viewing, so please be mindful of this when asking your questions or engaging in the chat. And if you could please refrain from taking screenshots or making your own recordings without permission. So this is the first of our 4-part conversation series on navigating early childhood education and care for children with disability, developmental delay and autism. This series is brought to you by Kindred in partnership with the Early Childhood Intervention Best Practice Network. And today's session is going to be focusing on reasonable adjustments in an early childcare setting. And I'm really pleased to say that we're joined by 2 wonderful speakers who will share their expertise and experiences. We've got Belinda, who is the practice lead educator and behavioural practitioner from Early Ed. Thank you for being here today, Belinda. And we've also got Layla, who is a parent to Otis, and she's going to share her family's journey through various education settings. Before we get started, one last little thing. I do want to acknowledge that everyone's journey is unique. We encourage you to take what resonates with your situation and discuss it with your child support network. This might include their educators, their therapists, or the medical professionals involved in their care. The best outcomes often come from a collaborative approach where families work together with their child's team to adapt strategies to suit their specific circumstances. So let's get into this topic because we've got lots of people listening. And Belinda, I'm going to go to you first because I'd really like you to help us understand what reasonable adjustments are and what they actually look like in an early childhood setting. Like, maybe you could give us some examples.
Sure. So, hi, I'm on the land of people of the Darug Nation, so thank you for having me here today. So, reasonable adjustments are changes or supports that allow children of all abilities to fully participate in everyday activities and their environment. So, in our case, the early childhood environment. And they make sure that all children have equal access to the learning, the playing activities, social experiences, not necessarily the same access. So it's making those adjustments, accommodating to children's abilities so that they all have equal access to that. So what are some of those adjustments? There's many examples that you can apply across all different environments. So, for example, physical environments. So those adjustments could include things like sensory-friendly spaces, maybe quiet areas, soft lighting, reducing noises, just knowing children's sensory preferences and how you can make those adjustments in a space. Adaptive furniture or equipment, so it could be adjustable tables, seating supports, specialised mobility to accommodate for children with physical needs. It could be clear signage in the physical environment and using visual supports. So pictures, symbols, labels, so the children can navigate their environment. Sorry, that's physical. It could be curriculum and learning adjustments. So flexibility in learning approaches, allowing children to engage with materials in different ways. So maybe using more tactile or resources, or maybe using some auditorily adaptive resources for children so that the curriculum is flexible. Maybe modifying activities in the curriculum, adjusting them so that children can participate. Maybe using larger, thicker handles in their paintbrushes, for example, for children with fine motor challenges or sensory difficulties, and putting paints in plastic bags so that they can have experiences without touching paints and getting dirty. It could be additional times or breaks in the curriculum. So offering extra time to complete tasks or allowing more breaks for children to recalibrate and take in their environment so that they can engage again. It could be communication and social supports. So that's number 3 that I've got listed here. It could be visual, again, as I've mentioned, and communication aids. So using picture cards, social stories, communication devices to accommodate for different communication needs. It could be peer supports and social, so that social support with a buddy system, encouraging friendships, including pairs, so that children are getting support from their more able peers, and it's more of it's a natural progression for them to develop friendships as well. Clear and consistent instructions in your curriculum, breaking things down for children, making tasks more simple for children, repeating these instructions and allowing practice if needed as well, modeling and practice. Behavioral and emotional supports is another reasonable adjustment. So having possibly what you could call calm down areas, but just for children, again, like I said, to recalibrate if necessary. And it allows a space possibly for us to co-regulate with children. It doesn't always have to be an expectation of self-regulation. Offer that invitation to maybe co-regulate with children and let them be and be with them to get back into their learning environment if they're feeling overwhelmed. Positive behaviour support is so important. Individualised strategies to help boost their self-esteem and manage responses in their environment. Predictability and routine. Maintain consistency with daily schedules to reduce that anxiety of not knowing, that uncertainty. Staff training and collaboration is another very important reasonable adjustment. So professional development, collaborating with families, as Bree's already said, that team around the child approach is so important. And maybe creating individualized, personalized plans to children through that collaboration. The difference that can make is children can feel more valued. Individual aspects can be blended, embedded, incorporated in the overall learning environment, develop more confidence. And again, it's just that equitable approach to learning and development for children.
And it sounds amazing. And I know that there's a lot there, and families might be listening thinking, oh my gosh, where do I start? Which is
Yeah.
why I want to go to you now, Layla, because I want you to think back to when Otis first started in childcare. What were some of those initial adjustments that actually made the biggest difference for him?
Yeah, so I think for us it was about starting small and identifying what were the immediate things that we needed to work on. So it was really basic at the beginning. It was just ensuring that his kind of immediate health needs were met. So for us, that looked like the fact that Otis is on quite a bit of medication. So it was the simple adjustment of staff offering him water multiple times throughout the day to maintain his hydration really helped. Also, it was the first time he kind of had meals outside of home that weren't cooked by us or they weren't familiar. So, and then we identified that there are a number of sensory issues that were coming up for him in that. So we worked with the centre to have healthy snacks for him that he could access throughout the day, as opposed to having to eat that one set meal with, 6 different textures combined that wasn't going to work for him. So it was kind of those basic things that we started off. And then looking back, he actually started in quite a few different settings as we kind of transitioned through those early years. So from a long daycare through to a preschool. And every time he started in a new centre, it was really about identifying those adjustments that were going to support his transition, to make him feel really safe, and to also help him understand this new environment, the new schedules, the new routines, and the new expectations. So those adjustments really looked like some of those things that Belinda touched on. So those visuals to really help understand new schedules, and also identifying peer buddies that he could work with and then support through those transitions to help him learn the new routines.
Oh, thanks for that. And again, like, where do we start? And I think, Belinda, how do we approach working together? So, I mean, we need to identify which adjustments are going to be most helpful. And obviously, it is a work in progress and there's going to be those immediate adjustments. But how can therapists, educators, and families work together to identify which ones are going to be most helpful now and in the future?
Excellent. Yeah, sure. So, Bree, I've shared 2 links with you that families might find really useful if you want to share them in the chat or however
Sure
you
can.
want to do it. One is for Reimagine Australia. The other one is a KU website, and it's called Inclusion Together. And that's got really good snippets of videos and bits of information of how families and professionals can work together in the way that you're asking. But basically, to make sure that we do set up our children for success, being as prepared as possible in advance is what I have found really works. And sometimes you don't get that time, so it's just jumping in early and ensuring the lines of communication are really there to work with the families who know the children the best, but also to share with the family the context of the environment that they're coming into, the educators, the children, the physical environment, etc., and really get input from any team around the children that exist, the OTs, the speechies, the physios, medical teams, whoever you've got in place that know the child, bring that information and collaborate and try, because what applies in one environment may not necessarily work in another. So that trial and error is important, but making sure everybody's on the same page and working towards the same goal. Making decisions about reasonable adjustments in early childhood setting really takes collaboration and intentionality, doing it for purposes, not just doing it for the sake of doing it and saying we're collaborating. Really having that genuine intentionality so that children have goals met and that they're purposefully and meaningfully involved in the total learning environment. Consider how the child's disability impacts on the learning environment, and in reverse, how the learning environment impacts on that child. So have those considerations, and going back to what reasonable adjustments can we make to get things going so this child has equal access to our learning environment. Identify what the barriers are. As they come up, you may not be able to plan for the barriers. They may emerge, but identify them when they come up and work out a plan of how can we address that barrier. Some you can do immediately, some you can't, so put those plans in place. Again, keeping that line of communication and collaboration open. In the case of neurodiverse children, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's really important to be mindful of as well. Understand that child's frustrations and that child's needs in that learning environment as well. So again, communication, trial and error, time, monitoring, and responding to that as we go.
Amazing. I love the word intentionality. It does take so much intentionality. And Layla, I know you've done a couple of things to help. Do you want to share a little bit?
Right.
Yeah, so I think Belinda touched on that intentionality and the pre-planning work that was involved. For us, I think a big part of that was developing an all about me for Otis. So that was like a great opportunity to really highlight who Otis was, what his strengths are, the strategies we knew worked for him. So his educators could really see the whole child, not just the reports they get that talk about delays and deficits when it comes to a child that has disability. So that was really powerful for us. Also for the fact that it gave us that kind of opportunity to talk about what our vision for Otis was and things that were important for us as a family. And I think when the centre and the educators have that shared understanding, then that's really when that collaboration can take place, because they know out of all the stuff they could be working on, this is the stuff that really matters for us. So that was really key. I also think that we chose a centre that was really happy to work in collaboration with Otis's broader team, so having a therapist visit the centre. And part of that was really having the centre understand what the role of the therapist was. So it wasn't to withdraw Otis, it wasn't that kind of one-on-one therapy with him, but rather it was like, this person here is a resource. They can model strategies to you, they can help you solve challenges that may be coming up in the moment, and just understanding kind of how we could work together on that. And then from a really practical standpoint, it was like, okay, well, like, let's schedule a time of day that they can come that works within the routine, and where that lead educator is available to work in collaboration so that we can all work together.
I might just keep with you for a second now, Layla, as well, because I'd love to know, were there any surprises or unexpected adjustments that actually turned out to be really beneficial?
I think that's the most surprising thing, was that it's actually the most simple and sometimes basic adjustments that have the power to like make the biggest difference. So one of Otis's strategies one of Otis's goals was around engagement in group time. And he had challenges around kind of staying engaged and wanting to get up and move around. So that was something that we were working on. And we had one therapist who came in, and her suggestion was like this vibrating seat cushion, which we did buy for like $90. And we trialed that, and that didn't work. And then we tried a range of other kind of sensory supports. And it wasn't until we could see peer budding was really working kind of in other aspects of the day that we brought that into the challenge we were facing in group time. That what happened is Otis would transition into group time with two of his peers. There was a special spot that was sneakily designated in kind of like a corner location. So the reality is he was kind of wedged in there between two peers, and they really created that natural barrier really for him. And when he started to wiggle and jiggle, they just kind of knew that they could grab his hands and give him a little bit of a squeeze. And that was actually the most successful, natural, simple, cost-effective strategy that had the biggest benefit, definitely. And then it's just surprising, because it's even those things that are those like whole class adjustments that actually work for not only your child, but the entire class. So really simple things like simplifying routines. We had therapists come in and realize actually that visual is like really small and it's in the corner and it's hard to see. Like, let's blow that up. Let's, refer to it multiple times a day. Simple things like that really supported him, but they worked for everyone. And so they were just really natural as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think most parents can relate to those expensive trial and error. I think I've got a cupboard full of sippy cups that I was trying to get my son to drink out of. And, there's probably $500 worth of sippy cups till we found the right one. Belinda, I'm sure you've got some experiences in your role about some of those unexpected adjustments. Did you want to share a few of those?
Sure. The first one that always comes to mind is social goals are often quite common for families. And we had one little boy who really wanted to be involved socially, but it wasn't quite working the way you would typically want it to work. So we had to really break down the strength-based approach. So what was working in other situations and environments, and what wasn't working here, and what's the skill that he needs to be able to help this work. And so we worked on explicit teaching. Once we identified where that gap was in his social skills and game entry and game participation, we explicitly taught. So with early childhood, you'll find that sometimes our approach, and I'm an early childhood teacher, is more about open-ended learning and following the child's lead, which is a beautiful thing, but sometimes that lead doesn't necessarily work when you've got games with rules such as duck, duck, goose, or what's the time, Mr. Wolf, and they all want to be involved. So being open to, well, what does this child need to work in this social context? And for him, we found it was explicitly teaching him the social entry skill that he needed. So we did it in small groups. We did it in structured groups first. We did it with teacher support, and then we weaned that support. And once we had the skill worked on, I won't say mastered, because none of us ever really master our social skills sometimes. But once it was enough, we tried it in the bigger environment. And again, we tried it with support, we tried it with the buddies, and then we weaned that off until he got it. And it worked beautifully. It took time, but that was a really good success example.
That's a great example.
Thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you as well, Belinda, because I think, you know, when our children do start in an early childcare setting, like we know them so well,
Yeah.
it takes time for the educators and the centre to get to know them. But from your experience, what are those simple adjustments that centres can implement like right away that are going
Yeah.
to make a big
Okay.
impact while they're getting to know the child?
Yeah, so sometimes we call these the do no harms. Let's just get it started while we're getting to, as you said, Brie, perfectly. Some examples I could give you are non-verbal communication aids and visual schedules, because that incorporates everything, the non-verbal, the gestures, the communication boards, the keyword sign, the visuals that we were talking about. And not only does that help children who may need this for their participation, but any children that are just overwhelmed with the environment. It's such an all-rounded tool that can help so many children in daily routines, knowing what expectations are, helping children with transitions and reducing anxiety of what's going to happen next. When are mum and dad going to pick me up? Those kind of things. Sensory friendly adjustments. So using tools that you mentioned, the wobble cushion, having a few cushions available, having a few fidget toys available, maybe adjusting lighting, reducing noise, and being conscious of our noise as educators. We can't always quieten our children, obviously, but there are times in the days where if we want it quiet. So being aware of things like that. Curriculum, routine, flexibility. That would be my key things. Don't feel like you have to do things all the time in the same way. Be flexible with our curriculum. Offer binary choices that are, I don't want to use the word control, both a win-win choice. So if they're going to choose something, be prepared for that choice. But offering those choices, flexibility in playtimes and the way things run, they would probably be my key go-to. Non-verbal, sensory-friendly, flexibility.
Absolutely. I know we've said this already before, but how important is that communication between families and their centre in making these adjustments successful?
Yeah, I believe it's crucial because no one knows their child better. But in early childhood, we know that environment and that context. So that communication of coming all together, I think, is crucial. It helps educators understand the child's needs, and the family's needs and what their goals are, and what we all want to be working on. It provides consistency between home and childcare as well. There will be modifications, as I keep saying, about the context and the environment, but that consistency is so important to reduce the confusion for the child. It encourages identification of needs and being able to scaffold what the next skill, what the next step is, what we're transitioning to, and what we're working towards for that child. And importantly, it builds trust. We want every child to feel a sense of belonging, safety, and security in our early childhood setting. So building that trust in a strong partnership creates that support and that safety, and hopefully that open communication from all parties.
Amazing. And Layla, as a parent, like what has that role communication has played with Otis's centres over the time? Like how has that helped with successful adjustments?
Yeah, I think communication is definitely key. I think it's really important to recognize that that communication is going to look different in different settings. So it's something that we learned kind of as the transition between daycare and preschool. So often it's just about figuring out and establishing what works in that provider with that setting. And then just fostering like open and honest communication. So, I asked for a lot of feedback. I really wanted to know how things are going, if anything was hard, so that we could really like problem solve together. And often that could look like, me sharing a strategy of something that kind of worked at home in case that could be leveraged in the centre. But yeah, just kind of working together as a team. And that teamwork could look different. So in one place we were at, there was like a regular team meeting once a term, which was really helpful. And then once I kind of knew the benefit of that, I could then ask for it if it wasn't kind of like part of that centre's routine. Like, can we have a time just to meet and discuss goals and those kinds of things? And that was really valuable to just kind of really establish what was working, what we could build upon, set some new goals, and then just adjustments and strategies to support those, and then just touch on anything that wasn't working. And did we need to come up with any other adjustments to kind of really support the educators and support Otis to kind of, have things work.
Yeah, amazing. We've talked about trial and error. We don't always get it right first go. Neither do childcare centres. I don't at home. I'll put my hand up. Like, it's definitely trial and error. But Belinda, do you have any examples of when an adjustment needed to be modified or changed and how you worked through that?
Yeah, sure. So, coincidentally, my example is around group time participation. And we trialed the fidget toys, and that had very minimal impact. So as a team, we observed the group time participation, what was working, what wasn't working, times of days, educators involved, all of that kind of stuff. And we brainstormed what other options we would like to try. So other options included things like smaller groups instead of a large group, and how we could do that, how we could use our environment, alternating the group format so that we did the heavy, deep pressure groundwork movement, basically, before we had that expectation of sitting and language, and doing reflection on, well, what does group time look like for children? Would children benefit from maybe partly participating, then expecting them to participate in the full time? And we also considered transitional lunch so that the short time participants could transition into a lunch while others could stay if they wanted to. And lunch was just a bit more extended and flexible. And so we brainstormed options. We sought the family input and asked them, we said, this is what we're thinking about. What do you think? What could you work? And then we worked together on that. In that example, they liked what we were proposing and were happy to give it a go. We trialed it. We monitored it. Most of it worked. Again, some didn't, but we communicated that and we just built on what was working.
Amazing. I love that. I love that approach. And, I guess as well, it's that tailoring and monitoring and communicating, and adjustments are going to change over time, just as our children learn and grow, and they're constantly changing. Layla, how did adjustments change over time for Otis?
Yeah, I think that adjustments just naturally evolved as his needs evolved and changed. So that I think with Otis, for instance, there was a period of time where he was putting things in his mouth, and there were all these strategies and all this investment of time of coming up with adjustments we could make to support kind of how we could meet that need for him. And we got to a stage where it kind of worked, but then also his need just changed. That wasn't what his regulation strategy was. So obviously, generally, our goals changed and our adjustments changed just naturally off the back of his evolving needs. And then I think just stepping back from a more kind of holistic viewpoint and looking at his journey with his early education, it was also thinking about where he was developmentally and then what that next phase and goal was for him. So in daycare, we really started to incorporate those social goals and those participation goals. So that really looked like, how we could have a goal and adjustments around him playing alongside equipment with other kids and those kinds of things, and how he could present at show and tell with visual supports. And then by the time that he got to preschool, the focus at that stage was really on supporting, on sustaining his engagements for longer periods in those group times, like we touched on, but also building his independence in around kind of daily routines to support his transition to school. And then now that Otis is at school, where the demands are much higher and the environment is more overwhelming, our focus is really on those regulation strategies and those sensory supports, so he is able to kind of be there throughout the day, and then also the curriculum adjustments so he can access the learning. So yeah, they definitely have changed over time.
Of course, just as our children do. I am mindful we're 11:30. We have run a few minutes over. I knew we would though, because this, there's some great gems that have come out in this. But I think just sort of as we're wrapping up, I'd love to know what advice you'd give to parents who are just starting to have those conversations about adjustments with their child centre.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to jump in.
I would say start with a clean slate for every individual, for educators and professionals, a clean slate for every individual child, and engage in critical reflection.
Yeah.
I'd say from a parent perspective, it's just a reminder that you know your child best. You're the expert in your child. So I think it's really important to start by thinking about what's important to and for your child, what their goals are, and just make sure you're building adjustments around those things. There's a million things that we could be doing for our children in the day, and there's a million strategies we could be working on, but I think it's coming back to what's most important for you and your child. And that's going to look different for everybody.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. I feel like we could stay on this session for a good another hour, but I am mindful that we want this information to be short, sharp, and accessible to families. So thank you for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. I think those practical examples and stories really bring to life how reasonable adjustments can make such a difference in early childhood settings. Thank you to everyone that has watched live today, and I hope everyone that gets the chance to watch the recording enjoys it and has some key takeaways from here. This is our first session of our 4-part series, so our next session will be on Monday next week. We will be discussing what does best practice look like in ECEC. So if you have registered, you will receive a reminder email with the details closer to the date. I have also just popped in the chat for anyone that hasn't registered for that. Today's discussion, I think, has shown how working together with families, educators, and support professionals can actually create a more inclusive early childhood environment for all children. And I really hope that everybody has gained some valuable insights from this. We have had a question from Sarah to say, can we share the recording with others? Yes, please do. We want this to reach as many families as possible. But yes, thank you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing everybody in our future sessions. So have a lovely day, and thank you, Belinda. Thank you, Layla. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Bree.
Thanks, Bree. Thanks, Layla.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.